Alright guys, and welcome back to the channel, and today I will be giving you my full card predictions and full card breakdown for UFC 320 Ankalaev versus Pereira 2 live Saturday, October 4th, and I absolutely cannot wait to get into it, and we have a lot of fights on this card. We have 14 fights, so we're going to go ahead and dive right on into these with the very first fight of the night, which is Punahele Soriano versus Nikolai Veretennikov, and a pretty underwhelming low-level welterweight fight here. Nothing super exciting coming from either one of these guys. Punahele has been very up and down, a little more underwhelming than, looking really good, and then Nikolai Veretennikov just has not impressed at all. This is, I believe, his second fight in the UFC. No, actually, maybe his third. I thought he was only 2 fights in, but he has not looked, very good at all. Losing to Austin Vanderford by TKO. Before that, Danny Barlow. He did pick up the win against the very young Argentinian fighter, Francisco Prada, but didn't look very impressive. And then Punahele, he's been putting it together in his last 2 fights. Decision win over Miguel Baeza, and then he had a very, actually impressive last win over Uros Medic, just coming across the cage and absolutely blasting him and TKOing him. And in this fight, it's a pretty low-level fight. Neither one of these guys are, very standout. They're never going to be top fighters in the division. But, what I have seen from Punahele on the feet is a little more impressive than what I've seen from Nikolai Veretennikov, and I think Punahele is just, he's a little younger, he's faster, and he's got knockout power. And in this fight, I think it's going to be a little interesting. For the first few minutes on the feet, Veretennikov's going to kind of be feeling him out. Punahele is going to be kind of finding his timing and his range, and then I think once that range is established, and once they kind of get those, those downloading moments out of the way, I think that Punahele is going to start to put the striking on him, and I think Punahele is going to come across the octagon, hit him with a nasty combination of shots, and I think he is going to TKO Nikolai Veretennikov in the second round. I think it'll be, kind of a, somewhat not too interesting first round, but then by the early half of the second round, Punahele is going to find that shot and TKO him. Nikolai is just not that good, not that impressive. Punahele, he's okay, but, at least he's got power, speed, and good striking, and he's got a little bit of youth on his side. So I'm going to go Punahele Soriano by TKO in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to Daniel Willie Cat Santos versus Sang Yoo, and a very interesting fight here at featherweight. Daniel, Willie Cat Santos, man, he's a handful. He's very well-rounded, very good on the feet, high pace, good cardio. And then you look over at Sang Yoo, and his UFC debut was absolutely insane. One of the cleanest, nastiest check hooks you will ever see. And, I mean, it was absolutely mind-blowing. Gautiérrez rushed in on him, and Sang stepped back and hit him with a shotgun left hook. I mean, it was a short inside left hook, but the snap and the sound on that hook was absolutely nasty. Crack snapped him on the chin, and Jega just face planted against the cage. Absolutely crazy KO. Super impressive debut from Sang Yoo. I mean, incredible short range power. And in this fight, I went back and forth on this a little bit because Daniel Santos, he's a little bit of a UFC veteran now, and he's very well rounded. He's never been knocked out. He's got a good pace, good speed. He's got a lot going on for him. But I look at that check left hook that Sang Yoo landed on Gautiérrez and the power at that range, and it absolutely impressed me. One of the greatest one-punch KOs from a debuting fighter we have ever seen. And I just have a feeling that he is going to have that kind of power that's just different. I mean, he touches you, and that's it. And it is a little hard to say that he's going to be able to TKO someone as well-rounded and as good as Daniel Santos and his only his second fight in the UFC. But I am just going to go ahead in this fight, and I'm going to trust that Sang is going to be evasive enough on the feet. He's going to be able to slide back on Daniel Santos, and he's going to be able to hit him with a counter shot and hurt him bad and TKO him. And if he can't TKO Daniel Santos early, this fight is going to get dragged out into the deeper rounds, and it could get real interesting. Then we could see Sang's cardio get tested. We could see Daniel Santos really put a mix-in bag of attack on him, and Daniel Santos could pull off this decision. I think the longer the fight goes, it's going to favor Daniel Santos just because he's going to have the experience, the cardio, the well-roundedness. But I think in that early half, that counter power and that slide back ability from Sang, that timing, that touch reaction, I think it's going to be dangerous. And I am going to go ahead and trust that Sang Yoo is able to find that slide back counter shot on Daniel Santos and hurt him bad. And I think he is going to put him away early. If he doesn't, the fight gets dragged out. It gets interesting. It probably gets close, and it probably favors Daniel Santos. But I'm going to go ahead with that impressive debut and just say that Sang Yoo can do it again, because that inside hook power, that touch counter power is incredible. And I mean, just the sound on that KO was amazing. So I am going to stick with Sang Yoo to go ahead and pick up his second UFC win by very impressive knockout. All right, and we are moving on up to Patchy Mix versus Jakub Wikłacz, and a very interesting fight here at bantamweight. You know, Patchy Mix, you know, over in his debut back a few months ago against Merab Dvalishvili, he did not look good. He kind of froze up in that fight. He looked like the UFC debut jitters were getting to him, and he just looked kind of flat. You know, and nothing against Mario Batista. He's a very well-rounded, very good, very solid threat in the bantamweight division right now. Mario's very hard to deal with anybody. But I think Patchy Mix just kind of froze up in that fight, and I think those UFC debut jitters really had a lot to do with that, because he is very talented, you know, in his past wins, and he's had a lot of great wins over in Bellator, a lot of impressive, you know, feats over there. But over on the other hand, you know, Jakub, Wikłacz has looked, you know, he's looked pretty decent over in his regional competition. He's picked up a lot of decisions, some submission wins, and, you know, he looks pretty decent. But I am going to go ahead in this fight, and I'm just going to say that Patchy Mix just has more upside. He's just a more well-rounded fighter. He's very, very dangerous in his jiu-jitsu game. He's got a ton of submission wins, and he has so much high-level experience coming over from Bellator, and I'm not going to hold a lot of weight against those UFC debut jitters, those kind of losses, because that happens to a lot of guys. And then once they get those jitters out of the way, they tend to kind of get back on track, especially if they're a high-level fighter from, you know, at least a B-level organization. And Patchy's very good, you know, very dangerous, very well-rounded. And I don't know if Jakub, maybe he's taking this fight on short notice, because he kind of seems out of nowhere, and he's, you know, just a low-level regional kind of Polish fighter. I feel like maybe this was supposed to be somebody else, but I couldn't find anything else to confirm it. But I'm assuming Jakub is maybe taking this on short notice, because Patchy should be fighting at least somebody else that's well-known in the top, you know, the back end of the top 20. But I'm assuming this kid's taking it on short notice, and I am just going to say that Patchy Mix is going to be the more well-rounded fighter. He's going to be too much for the debuting Wikłacz, and I think Patchy Mix at some point in the second round is going to mix in the striking, mix in the takedowns, and I think he is going to submit Wikłacz here in this fight. You know, I just feel like this kid is a little too unknown. You know, this is going to be his debut now. I'm assuming it's short notice. And I think Patchy's just going to get back on track, and I think he's just going to beat him on the feet, beat him in the grappling, get him down, and submit him. So I'm going to go ahead and take Patchy Mix to get the second round submission over Jakub Wikłacz in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to a very interesting fight here at welterweight. We are looking at Brahimaj versus Austin Vanderford, and this is a super interesting fight here at welterweight. You know, Austin Vanderford looking pretty decent outside of the UFC, a few hiccups here and there, but, you know, he did look pretty decent in his UFC debut against Veretennikov. You know, he was able to kind of outlast him, outstrike him, TKO him on the ground. But as I was saying earlier, Veretennikov is very low level, nothing impressive about him, so I am not sold on Austin Vanderford at all. You know, like, he looked okay in that fight, but, you know, you were fighting a very low-level debuting guy who was already up there in age. And you look at you look at Austin Vanderford here. He is 35. You know, he's kind of getting up there in age too. And I look over at Brahimaj, you know, and he's had some ups and downs early on in his UFC career, but outside of that, I mean, Brahimaj, he had a long period where he was off for about 3 years, so he had a lot of time off. He had some injuries, he had some stuff he was dealing with, but outside of that, Ever since Ramiz has come back, man, he's looked very impressive. He KO'd Mickey Gall, which is not saying a whole lot because Mickey Gall is not good at all, but he KO'd Mickey Gall, and then he came back and he submitted Billy Ray Goff. So it seems like this time off for Ramiz has been very good for him. He's looking impressive, he's putting it together, and he's looking very dangerous, and I like what I see from him so far. This second wave of his career, man, is looking very sharp, and he's young, he's fast, and he's got very good jiu-jitsu. And what I have seen from Austin Vanderford is just not impressed me at all. Yeah, he's the husband of Paige Van Zandt, but outside of that, that's all he's got going for him. And, this is kind of a close fight in the picks a little bit, and, Vanderford is favored, but I think it's a misstep here. I think Ramiz Brahimaj has the upside in this fight. I think he's got the better jiu-jitsu, he's quicker, he's more well-rounded, and he's more impressive. And I think in this fight, he is going to outstrike Austin Vanderford on the feet, and then I think at some point, he is going to get him down in the middle to the back end of the first round, and I am going to say that he submits Austin Vanderford in this fight. I think he's going to overwhelm him with speed. I think he's going to overwhelm him with power. And I think he's going to hurt him and submit him. And Ramiz Brahimaj has very good jiu-jitsu, and I think he's just more impressive in all the other areas that are going to matter in this fight. And Austin Vanderford, I just don't see much future potential for him. I don't see star potential for him. I think he's probably at his ceiling. And I'm going to go ahead and go against the Tapology, predictions here, and I'm going to say Ramiz Brahimaj picks up this win by first round sub, possible first round TKO. So we are going Ramiz Brahimaj in this one. All right, cruising right along to women's flyweight. We're looking at Veronica Hardy versus Brogan Walker. And a fun little, matchup here at women's flyweight. Veronica Hardy has been looking pretty decent for the majority of her fights, over the last year or two. She's had a lot of solid wins against Juliana Miller, Jamie Lynn Horth, and then JJ Aldrich. But she is coming off a loss to Eduarda Mora. And, not knocking her too much. Eduarda is a pretty good fighter herself. But Veronica Hardy overall has looked like she's been improving. She's been, adding on to her skill set. She is married to Dan Hardy, former UFC fighter and former UFC title challenger. And Dan Hardy, was never top level back in the day, but he was a solid fighter, very good striking, good knockout power, good knockout power. He was a solid prospect back about 15 years ago. So she does train with a former fighter and her husband. And, for the most part, Veronica Hardy has looked pretty solid. And then we look over at Brogan Walker, and she has just not looked good. I mean, you see she's had 4 losses out of her last 5 fights. Very underwhelming performances with only 1 win in her last 5 coming in the regionals against Amelia King. And then outside of that, TKO to Juliana Miller, which is not looking good at all. Juliana Miller is not good herself. And then the decision loss to Lasmin Lucindo. And I'm looking at this going, Veronica Hardy she's got the better training coach and partner in her husband, Dan Hardy. She's got good striking. She's well-rounded. She's still young at 29 years old. And Brogan Walker is 36. She's getting up there in age, and it's just not looking good for her. She has hit her ceiling. She's not going to get any better. And I do not see her beating Veronica Hardy in any area of this fight. I think Veronica Hardy is going to cleanly and decisively outstrike her and just outwork her on the feet and pick her apart for 3 straight rounds, and I think Veronica Hardy is going to pick up a 30-27 easy unanimous decision in this fight. So we are going Veronica Hardy by decision in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to Farid Basharat versus Chris Gutiérrez. And this is a super, super fun and interesting fight at bantamweight. And, you look over at Farid Basharat, man, and he has just looked incredible. 13-0, a lot of amazing UFC wins, great streak he has going on, beating Damon Blackshear, Kletson Rodriguez, Taylor Lapilus, and Victor Hugo. And, the Basharat brothers are one of the best duos in the UFC right now. They're both very good. His brother is coming off of a hard loss to Ricky Simone, but they're still very talented. And Farid is 13-0, man. He's looked incredible. And you look over at Chris Gutiérrez, and he's a very, very solid fighter, very hard to deal with, and some of the best leg kicks in the UFC. His leg kicks are the key to so many of his victories, because he is able to download you, throw you off, hit you with those leg kicks, hit you with those body kicks. He's able to move very well, and those kicks are hard to deal with. And if this was any other fighter, mid-level fighter, you know, top 15, top 20 fighter in the division, you know, I would be picking Chris Gutiérrez here because, you know, he's just so good with his ability to evade, to move, to land kicks. But I look over at Merab Basharat, man, and the kid is just, he's so good. He's so impressive. He's very well-rounded, and he's just able to mix it up so well. And I think in this fight, I don't think he is going to get stationary enough, and I don't think he's going to get one-dimensional enough to just stand there and get eaten up with kicks. I think Gutiérrez will probably land a kick or two, and then Merab is going to start to adjust. He's going to start to put the hands on him. He's going to start to mix it up a lot, and I think he is going to be a problem for Chris Gutiérrez in this fight. It's definitely going to be on the feet the entire time. This fight is absolutely going to a decision, but I think Merab has enough in the bag to mix it up, avoid the kicks, and outstrike Chris Gutiérrez. So I am going to go Merab Basharat in this fight by decision. I think it's going to be back and forth the entire time. It's going to be interesting. Chris Gutiérrez is going to have some moments with the kicks, but I think Merab is going to have the better moments overall, and I think he picks up the decision win here. So we're going Merab Basharat by decision in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to the very impressive and seriously dangerous Atebe Gautier versus Ozzy Diaz, and this is a very easy cut and dry fight for me. Atebe Gautier has looked absolutely monstrous. This guy is the new Francis Ngannou. He is built like Francis. He is the middleweight Francis Ngannou, man. He has that scary Nigerian power, that one-touch death punch power, and the guy has just looked incredibly impressive, incredibly scary, and he is only 23 years old. It's incredible how scary, how powerful, how big, how muscular, how menacing this guy looks, and he looks like he's like 33. He looks like an aged veteran, but he is a young kid. He has so much potential, so much scary power, and he hasn't even hit his peak yet. I mean, this kid has the ability to be a future champion with how much more room he has to grow, with how much more power he has to add on, how much more striking accuracy, how much more technical ability he can add, and he just looks incredible, man. He looks like the next problem at middleweight. And then you look over at Ozzy Diaz, and nothing impressive about this guy at all. He's pretty much just a can. He's had some wins in LFA, but outside of that, he didn't look good in his UFC debut against Ming Yang Zhang, who's an absolute beast, and then he did have the win over Jordan Santos, but nothing impressive. But in this fight, I am looking at this from a pure power and just menacing presence perspective. I mean, Atebe Gautier is just going to put it on you. He's going to get in your face, and when he lands, he is 100% going to hurt you. And if Ming Yang Zhang can put you away with one shot, Atebe Gautier is going to put you away with one shot. And I think this is a easy, I mean, lion hunting his wounded prey. Atebe is going to come out like a vicious lion, close him off, cut him off, hit him with bombs, and absolutely kill Ozzy Diaz here. So I am going Atebe Gautier by first round KO. I think it's going to be easy. It's going to be a clean knockout, or at least TKO, and Atebe is just going to add on, and he's going to move up to, adding another win to his record, because the kid just has so much potential, and he has scary, scary Nigerian power. So we are going Atebe Gautier by first round KO on this one. All right, and we are moving on up to Edmund Shahbazyan versus Andre Muniz, and a fun fight here at middleweight, and looking over at the Edmund Shahbazyan side, he struggled early on in his UFC career. He had some wins, and then he started to hit some rocky losses, and it was looking real tough for him. But, Edmund Shahbazyan in his last few performances has looked very good. He's still young at 27 years old, and he was training with Edmond Tavarian, which was, Ronda Rousey's former striking coach, who is not good, a very kind of low-level kind of boxing coach, and Edmond Tavarian is the reason why Ronda wound up losing a lot of her fights on the feet, because he just had poor game plans, poor striking, plans in his fight, and it got Ronda, lit up and beat, and a lot of fights on the feet. But, looking over at Edmund Shahbazyan, he is really starting to put it together now, and he's learning, he's building, he's adding on, and he's really settling into his form, and he's looked great in his last two fights, knocked out Dylan Budka, and then he had the very impressive performance over Andre Procházka. And so I think he's really just settling in at 27 years old, and he's starting to find his groove. He is finally starting to put it together. And you look over at Andre Muniz, and just nothing special about him at all. BJ BJJ fighter, he's 35 years old. He's getting up there in age. He's hit his ceiling. And Andre Muniz has just not looked good in the majority of his fights. Got knocked out by Ikram Askarov. He had the loss to Paul Craig, which doesn't look good. And then he had the win against Jung Young Park, but it was by split decision. He arguably lost that fight. So, he's hit his ceiling. He's 35. He's not good on the feet. His Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not high level enough to get him through these fights anymore. And I think Emmett Shahbazyan has finally found his groove, and he's putting it together. He's still a young prospect, and he's going to enter his prime and his peak. And I think Edmund Shahbazyan is going to come out, find the range on Andre Muniz. Muniz is not going to get any takedowns on him. He's not going to be able to get a hold of him. And Edmund is just going to wind up finding the timing, hitting him with the right amount of combination shots, and I think Edmund is going to wind up knocking out Andre Muniz pretty easily and pretty cleanly. I mean, this should be, up-and-coming prospect versus aging, declining veteran with really not much going on. So, I think Edmund Shahbazyan is doing all the right things. He's starting to hit a groove. He's still entering his prime, getting towards his peak, and, he still has endless possibilities and, a very high ceiling. So, I am going to say Edmund Shahbazyan knocks out Andre Muniz in this fight, and it's going to be pretty easy. So we are moving on up to the very next fight, which is Macy Chiasson versus Yana Santos. And interesting fight here at women's bantamweight. Macy Chiasson, has been pretty decent throughout her UFC career. Had some ups, had some downs, but for the most part, she's been up. She's had the submission win over Pani Kianzad. Before that, Mara Bueno Silva, but that was a cut stoppage. But she is for the division. Macy Chiasson is a big girl. She's very tall. She's 5'11", 72-inch reach, so she's big. And, she puts it together pretty decently. And, she is coming off the loss to Ketlen Vieira, but Ketlen Vieira, she's a very solid, fighter in the women's division, very well-rounded, good striking, good plotting pressure. But then we look over at Yana Santos, the wife of Thiago Santos, who was an absolute, killer when he was fighting in the UFC. And she, started to really have a skid back a few years ago, losing to Irina Aldana, Holly Holm, Carol Rosa, but she has looked pretty impressive since she's come back. She was pregnant. She was out about a year and a half. She came back and, she looked good against Chelsea Chandler, and she looked good against the declining Miesha Tate. But, outside of that, beating those kind of lower level women at this point in their career, I look at it and go, Yana Santos, she's 35. Macy Chiasson's 34. They're about the same age. But Macy Chiasson is just bigger. She's got bullying power. She's got pretty decent striking. She's going to have the reach in this fight. And I think she is going to be a problem for Yana Santos in this fight. I think she's just going to be faster with the punches. She's going to be able to bully her, back her up, clinch her against the cage. And I think she just has more upside to beat Yana Santos in all of these areas standing. And Yana's probably going to have a few moments, but I think Macy's just going to be able to put it on her, put the size, put the pressure, put the weight on her, excuse me, and I think she's going to be able to just outstrike her on the feet. And I am going to say Macy Chiasson picks up a decision in this fight. I think it's going to be a 30-27 unanimous. I don't think Yana's really going to have a whole lot to offer her, but she will keep it on the feet and she will keep it competitive. But I think Macy's just a little younger, she's bigger, she's faster, she's got the reach, and I think she's just going to be able to bully Yana in this fight. So we are going Macy Chiasson by decision in this one. All right, and cruising right along, we are looking at Josh Emmett versus Youssef Zalal, and this is a very fun fight at featherweight. Josh Emmett is a UFC veteran at this point. He has been around a long time, and, he is one of the most dangerous strikers in the UFC, some of the nastiest one-punch power we have ever seen. We saw what he did to Michael Johnson. We saw what he did to Bryce Mitchell. We've seen what he's done to so many guys, and he is such a high-level threat on the feet. And Josh Emmett, he's been around a long time. He's been starting to struggle in his recent fights. He's 1-3 in his last 4. And his only win was against the Bryce Mitchell when he knocked him out with that deadly, stiff overhand right. But outside of that, he lost the fight to Lerone Murphy, lost the fight to Ilia Topuria and Yair Rodriguez, these guys that are just elite, younger strikers on the feet. And, Josh Emmett is 40 years old, man. He is old now. He has hit the 40 mark, and he is starting to decline. He's still dangerous. He's still fast. He's still powerful. but he is struggling against younger, better, more well-rounded strikers. And Youssef Zalal, ever since his UFC comeback, man, he has looked amazing. Looked great against Billy Quarantillo, Yarno Aarons, Jack Shore, Calvin Kattar, who's a very solid boxer, and Youssef has just been able to find the timing on these guys. He looks great on the feet. He's got great submissions, and he's just super well-rounded. And I am just, right now, Josh Emmett hitting 40 years old. He's on the decline. He's slowing down a little bit. Youssef Zalal is just looking like a monster right now. Very hard to deal with. Very hard striking to try to evade, and he's got great jiu-jitsu. And, even though Josh Emmett is the veteran, and he has a lot of high-level experience, I think he is on his decline. This is where we're going to start to see Josh Emmett really start to lose fights, and he's probably about a year or two away from retirement. I don't think he's going to beat any other high-level fighters. I don't think he's going to beat any young, well-rounded, high-level prospects. And I think Youssef Zalal right now, I think he's just undeniable, and I think he's going to be a handful for Josh Emmett on the feet. I think he's going to be hard for Josh Emmett to close off and land clean punches on, and I think Zalal is going to light him up on the feet. He's going to be able to counter-strike, and then I think Zalal is going to take him down, and I think he is going to submit Josh Emmett in the second round. I think he's just going to be too well-rounded, too hard to read on the feet, and once he mixes in those takedowns, his jiu-jitsu game is very high level. He has submitted a lot of guys, and I think Youssef is going to find that submission on Josh Emmett and put him on a second loss skid. So I am going Youssef Zalal by second round submission in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to the most exciting fight of the night. This is going to be absolute fireworks, and I can't wait for it. We are looking at Yuri Procházka versus Khalil Rountree Jr., and a super, super fun fight here at light heavyweight. I mean, Yuri Procházka is one of the most exciting, dynamic, and dangerous strikers the UFC has ever seen. His constant movement, his in and out, his up and down, his level changing, his spin attacks, his punching, everything about him is so unorthodox and so just unpredictable, and that's what makes Yuri so dangerous. He has been a problem for pretty much everybody he has fought, outside of Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira's beat him twice, but even in the first Alex Pereira fight, he gave Alex some trouble, had him backing up, hitting him with shots, and Yuri is dangerous to deal with. He's very hard to deal with because of that unorthodox style, and you can never fully read what he's going to do, and you can never really tell what's about to come at you. We saw how he overwhelmed Jamal Hill with so many dynamic attacks and just brutalized him nonstop. But then you look over at Khalil Rountree, man, and he has looked very, very good over the last few years. Outside of his loss to Alex Pereira, he has looked absolutely amazing. Knocking out Anthony Smith, beating up Jamal Hill and dominating him for pretty much, 5 rounds, man, just looking fantastic. And his only loss was against Alex Pereira, but you cannot knock him for that because it's Alex Pereira. And the fact is, he looked very good in that fight. Khalil Rountree stood there with Alex for 4 rounds. He landed on Alex. He hurt Alex at one point, dropped him down to a knee. And Khalil, he hung in there, man. And the only thing that affected him in that fight was his cardio. His cardio started to tank in the 4th round, and Alex was able to just come back and overwhelm him and beat on him and brutalize him. But if Khalil's cardio had held up in that fight, and he even said it on a podcast, my cardio came back to haunt me, and that's what lost me the fight. If Khalil was able to maintain his cardio, man, he could have wound up going into a 5th round with Alex and putting it on him and hurting him and beating him and pulling off one of the biggest upsets of all time. Khalil looked absolutely great in that fight up until that 4th round when that cardio really started to hurt him. So I look at this fight and I went back and forth on it because it's such an interesting style. Khalil is powerful. He's he's got great striking. He's a great technical striker, clean boxing, good defense. But Yuri is a constant dynamic storm. He is a constant tornado, just a hurricane that is constantly changing categories. 1 minute he's a category 2, then he's a 3, he's a 5, he's a 2, he's a 3. And you cannot gauge the storm that is going to constantly evolve and hit you. And that is why in this fight I am favoring Yuri Procházka because that unpredictability, that dynamic attack, that up and down, that mix-up, that spin attack, those kicks. I mean, Yuri is just so awkward to deal with. And if this was a traditional striker fighting Khalil that was just going to stand in front of him and just box with him and counter-strike with him, I would be picking Khalil. But Khalil has never fought someone this dynamic. He's never fought someone this unpredictable, this dangerous, this wild. And I think it's going to be a hard time for him in this fight. He's going to be competitive. He's going to have moments. But I don't think he's going to be able to crack the puzzle of Yuri Procházka. Now, with the finish in this fight, Yuri could wind up TKOing him. It's possible, but I don't think he's going to. Khalil has been historically very tough. He's only been knocked out once or twice. Johnny Walker knocked him out with an elbow. I think someone else knocked him out, and I'm blanking on it. But I think if Khalil can stand with Alex Pereira for 4 rounds and survive 3 rounds with Alex Pereira, I think he can survive 3 rounds with Yuri. And I think Yuri is going to outstrike him for 3 rounds, and I think he's going to pick up the decision. Maybe Khalil steals a round with more impactful, significant strikes, but I think at the end, Yuri is either going to take 2 of the 3 or he's going to take all 3. So he's either going to pick up a 30-27 or a 29-28. Either way, I think Yuri Procházka beats Khalil Rountree with better dynamic attack, more unpredictability, and I think he takes the decision over Khalil Rountree. All right, and we are moving on up to a very, very interesting fight in Joe Pyfer versus Abus Magomedov, and a super interesting fight here at middleweight. And, you know, I went back and forth on this fight because I think this is one of the most interesting fights of the night, and I think there is a very, very high chance of an upset here. And the reason I think that is because Abus Magomedov, I mean, we saw him back about 2 years ago fight Sean Strickland and gas and get beat up and TKO'd by Sean Strickland. And that, you know, Sean Strickland is not a finishing machine, even though he's got great boxing and cardio and he's hard to deal with. But to see him get TKO'd by Sean Strickland and gas so early, it didn't look good. But then Abus Magomedov made some changes, he got better, and now he has been on a very impressive streak. And he's been looking like the next problem to deal with. I mean, he's very well-rounded, he's fixed the cardio issues, he's got good pace, he's got good striking, and he comes at you and he puts it on you. And then you look over at Joe Pyfer, and Joe Pyfer has looked, you know, absolutely fantastic, knocking out Marc-Andre Barriault, outstriking Kevin Gastelum, dropping Gastelum, beating him up, brutalizing him pretty badly in that fight. You know, and his only loss in the UFC so far has been Jack Hermanson, you know, and Jack Hermanson is a very well-rounded, solid veteran. But, you know, Joe Pyfer's striking looks great. He's sharp. He's young. He's 29. He's still entering his prime. He still has so much of much more of a ceiling space to grow and get better in. And, you know, I went back and forth on it because Joe Pyfer is going to be the better striker in this fight. I think he's going to have the cleaner hands. He's going to be a bit quicker. But if Joe Pyfer starts to kind of, you know, pull back in this fight and he doesn't put it on Abus, I think Abus has a very good chance of coming forward, throwing teep kicks, throwing leg kicks, mixing it up, and kind of just backing Joe Pyfer up. So Pyfer is going to have to be very, very sharp and very, very on point in this fight to outstrike Abus and really make a statement. You know, and I think Abus has a very good chance of pulling this off. But I'm looking at Joe Pyfer. You know, Abus is 35. He's up there in age. He's improving, but he's kind of close to his ceiling. But Joe Pyfer still has plenty of room to grow. Great striking, great hands, very sharp technical boxing. And I am going to trust that Joe Pyfer can outstrike and outlast Abus Magomedov in this fight, you know. But if he doesn't keep those hands consistent, if he doesn't keep the pressure and the combinations on him, Abus could just walk forward and really pick him apart. There's a high chance of an upset in this fight. But I am going to go ahead and stick with the younger, better, faster technical striker, and I'm going to say Joe Pyfer continues his streak and picks up the win against Abus Magomedov. But I think it's very interesting, and it could be a very close fight. You know, Joe Pyfer could wind up winning this by a split decision. Even Abus could wind up winning this by split decision if Joe is not able to put the hands consistently enough on him and really hurt him. But I'm going to stick with Joe Pyfer to pick up the win in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to the co-main event of the evening, and we're looking at Merab Dvalishvili versus Cory Sandhagen, and this is such an interesting, fun fight here at bantamweight. You know, Merab Dvalishvili has been looking absolutely unstoppable in the UFC. I mean, he ran through Chiasson in that rematch. You know, Chiasson looked okay in the first fight. Towards the very end of the fight, really put it on Merab, was able to throw teep kicks, hurt him, back him up, had him kind of on the bicycle, but it was too little too late. And we thought, okay, maybe Chiasson will show some improvements and really put it on Merab in the rematch. And Merab just steamrolled him, took him down, submitted him, and it wasn't much of a fight at all. And Merab is just looked incredibly impressive. What he did to Umar Nurmagomedov, you know, Umar was winning the early quarter of that fight, and then Umar started to gas, and Merab's tank, that gas tank, that cardio is next level. I mean, it is almost machine-like how his cardio is just never ending, and he's never even breathing hard, and that wrestling and that grappling and that pressure is so hard to deal with. You know, Merab is going to be a problem for a lot of guys. You know, and then you look over at Cory Sandhagen, and Cory is one of the most technically sound. You know, his ability to mix it up in there is just so good, man. He is a sleek, slick, tactical striker. He downloads you, he reads you, he picks his shots very well, he mixes it up very well. He's got flying knees. We saw him knock out Frankie Edgar with a flying knee, and he's just such a crafty, methodical, mathematical fighter. He's a very, very intelligent fighter. You know, and Cory Sandhagen has had so many impressive wins, you know, beating Sang Yoo, beating Marlon Vera, looking at his most recent fight over Deiveson Figueiredo, you know, looking very good in that fight. And then he had the loss to Umar. But, you know, Cory Sandhagen is one of the most tactical, intelligent strikers in the UFC. And, you know, in so many fights, I'm going to pick him against other strikers because he's just able to download you and figure you out. But when it comes to the wrestling and it comes to the grappling, I think Cory Sandhagen is going to struggle in this fight. And the other problem is Merab is the much shorter fighter, but that is only going to be to his benefit because he is going to be able to shoot in under Cory's long, lanky frame, and I think he's going to be able to take him down. I think he's going to be able to take Cory down for the vast majority of the rounds in this fight. And the only thing that Merab is really going to have to worry about is when he shoots these takedowns, he's going to have to be very aware of a flying knee because Cory could time a flying knee on him, knock him out, and faceplant him. But Merab's pace, his pressure, his cardio is undeniable. It's unbeatable right now. And even though, you know, if Merab's wrestling wasn't so good and he took, you know, a lot of his fights took place on the feet 70-80% of the time, I would easily pick Cory Sandhagen to outstrike him and beat him on the feet. But when it comes to the grappling, this is a different world. This is something that Cory has never experienced on this level. This high-level pace, this endless cardio, this Terminator pressure. And I think Merab is just going to be able to just shoot in on him, get him down, get under that lanky frame, double leg him, hold him down, smother him, you know, and I think it's going to be a lot. And I like Cory Sandhagen. I would love to see him pick up the upset and win this fight, but I think Merab is going to be too much. And I think Merab is going to wind up picking up a 49-46 on him. I think he's going to take it 4 rounds to 1. Maybe Cory outstrikes him in a round early on before Merab gets his takedowns going and Cory's able to kind of mix it up, touch him with some shots. Maybe Cory even steals 2 rounds. But at the least, you know, it's going to be a 48-47 Merab. But I'm going to say Merab takes the decision 49-46, 4-1, and retains his belt. Alrighty, and now we are moving on up to the main event of the evening, and I absolutely cannot wait to talk about this fight. I'm so excited because we are looking at Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira 2, and this is such a interesting fight. I love this fight, and, you know, I was one of the few YouTube predictors to pick Magomed Ankalaev in the first fight, and I was the only UFC predictor that said that Magomed Ankalaev would beat Alex Pereira by decision and he would outstrike Alex Pereira. There were some predictors out there saying that Magomed would, you know, knock Alex out, that he might submit Alex, you know, but nobody predicted that Magomed would stay on the feet with Alex for 5 rounds and craftily outstrike him and I was the only one to call it and predicted it perfectly. And I think in this fight, man, like it's such an interesting rematch because Magomed is one of the craftiest strikers in the UFC. He, you know, his left hand is an absolute laser. It's an accurate laser. The way that Magomed is able to move, how he's able to set up his punches, the way that he's able to download you. And Magomed very, very rarely even gets hit with big punches. You know, he's very solid defensively. He doesn't get hit cleanly a lot, and he is such a crafty striker. You know, he can switch stances. He can hit you with the right. He can go, you know, southpaw, hit you with the left. He's got great kicks, great front kicks up to the face. You know, and Magomed is a crafty puzzle to deal with. You know, and you look over at Alex Pereira, one of the most dominant, dangerous champions we have ever had, one of the greatest kickboxers of all time. He has had some of the most impressive wins we have ever seen in the UFC, knocking out Procházka, Jamal Hill. I mean, TKO and Israel Adesanya, TKO and Khalil Rountree. He is such a threat. He is such a high-level kickboxing threat. Alex's left hook, you know, his inside calf kicks, his leg kicks, he is such a problem everywhere. And Alex Pereira is a dangerous monster for the majority of the division. But just like I predicted in the first fight, Magomed Ankalaev is a different level of crafty. He is hard to read. He's hard to download. He is able to adjust on the fly. He is able to evade your power left hook. He is able to evade your kicks, you know, for the most part, outside of the Jan Blachowicz fight where he got eaten up with a lot of kicks. But in the first fight with Alex Pereira, didn't eat a ton of kicks. He was able to back Alex up. He was able to avoid his big shots, stifle his movement, and he was able to even land a shot and hurt Alex, knocked him against the cage, almost knocked him out, you know, had him hurt bad. And Magomed is just crafty, and he's young. He's 33. He's entering his prime, his peak, and I think this is the Magomed era. And, you know, Alex Pereira is a threat, but the one thing with Alex is that his stance is very flat-footed. He keeps his hands low and his chin out. Alex is very stiff, and if you are able to back him up with enough pressure and you're able to cut him off enough and you're able to shut down his southpaw left hook, you know, missile, Alex can tend to freeze up, and that chin is out. Those hands are down. You know, Alex does not move his head. He got tagged in the Procházka fight. He got tagged bad by Israel Adesanya and almost knocked out, you know, on the horn. You know, and then Israel was able to knock him out with the same overhand punch in the rematch. So, you know, Alex Pereira has defensive flaws, and Magomed showed that in the first fight. And he's just a craftier, faster, younger, slicker striker. And I don't think Alex's left hook is going to be, he's not going to be able to use one tool to beat Magomed Ankalaev. He's just not going to be able to. And I think in this fight, I predicted Magomed in the first fight would beat Alex by decision, and I was spot on. But I think in this fight, Magomed has now fought Alex. He knows the range. He knows the timing. He knows his defensive posture, the hands low, feet flat, chin out. And I think in this fight, I think Magomed is going to land the kill shot on Alex, and I think he TKOs him. First fight was a decision. Read him, downloaded him, figured him out, and I think it's going to be the same in this fight. Alex is 38 years old. He's at his ceiling. He's not going to get any better. He's still very good, but he's not going to improve. He's not going to add on to his skills. And he's been knocked out before. That chin's got a crack in it. Magomed's never even been hurt in a fight. Magomed's never been knocked out in a fight. Magomed lost one fight to Paul Craig, you know, and that was that was kind of a last-second thing. But then the Jan Blachowicz fight, that was a bad call. It shouldn't have been a draw. Magomed won the fight. So, you know, Magomed technically should only have one loss in the UFC. But this is his time. He's a crafty switch stance striker, and he's a problem. And I think Magomed is going to close in on Alex. He's going to be able to download him. And in those first two rounds, it'll be competitive. It'll be back and forth. But then Magomed will figure him out by the middle of the fight, land a huge counter shot, hurt Alex, stumble him down, and wind up TKOing him. And I think he gets the job done. And if he does not knock Alex out, he will beat him by decision 49-46. Probably even maybe a 48-47. Maybe Alex is able to kind of sneak some rounds with some leg kicks, with some, you know, some clean shots on the outside. Maybe is able to edge 2 rounds. But I think Magomed is going to be able to just out-slick him, out-crafty him, and I think Magomed is going to pick up this decision either way. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for my breakdown. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you saw, please subscribe, like the video, and I will see you with my predictions for UFC 321. Take care.